Okay, so we're gonna break down the two. It's very brief, right? It's not. We don't have enough to go on to make a true review about this. More on for Summer Part 2, right? Copium, imagine. So, these two Nikkes are enhances allies' attack every time she destroys an enemy's part. She supports her allies quickly destroying the enemy parts, but also maintains significant attack power after destroying them. And we have Sakura that also has something similar, which is an attacker Nikke whose attack grows stronger every time she destroys enemy parts. And she can sustain more powerful attacks according to the number of parts destroyed. Now, this is interesting because it's essentially parts break synergy. I don't think we have had that yet. And it seems like they will have some synergy, yes. They're both wind-coded, so this is going to feel a little bit more the wind element damage dealing aspect of team comps. Which currently is basically solely fueled by freaking SBS. So they're not going to compete with SBS. SBS is just too strong for that. But we have Assault Rifle wind-coded attacker that grows stronger every time parts are broken. And support wind-coded that makes things stronger when parts are broken. Now, it does say that she needs to break the parts, so there might be a little bit of anti-synergy between the two. Although, we'll have to wait and see how they work. There are some people that think that because they are AR or because its parts broken, it might not be good. It could be good. I actually broke down a little bit all of the Tyrant classes and all of the parts, because this is going to be mostly a type of like solo raid / union raid type of Nikke. The only non-Tyrant, non-boss class Raptures that have parts that are breakable currently are the Chapter 25 snake-looking enemies. I forgot their name. But here's like a quick thing. So when I put pluses, it means that parts respawn. So for example, Harvester, it's the legs. You break them. They will respawn at some point in the fight, so technically you have 4 part breaks, but it's throughout a 3-minute fight. Blacksmith, you only have 2 parts to break throughout the 3-minute fight. Kraken, it's a little bit weird. It's the tentacles that you can kind of break, so I put it as 2+, but it's a little bit iffy. Nihilister, though, is part 1, you have 4 parts to break, and then on P2, you have 2 parts, which is the heads. That's already a good amount of parts, and then you have Mother Whale, which is 8 parts to break, and I put an asterisk here because as soon as you break those 8 parts, Mother Whale just dies. Gravedigger has 2 parts, well, technically 3, I mistyped that. You have the center and the 2 little side things. And Modernia has 3 parts that do respawn if you break them all, so there could be a little bit of a thing that you could get rolling there if it's a benefit. Gatekeeper has 4 parts that just keep respawning every time you break them all, but that's for collabs only. Chatterbox has 3 parts that respawn. Technically, you only want to kill 2 and not the core, otherwise he will slam you into oblivion. So those 2 will respawn over time. So this one has quite a few parts to break. Alexander is basically Train, and that is 6 parts on P1. P2 doesn't have parts, and they respawn pretty much on cooldown, so you can just break them. Land Eater Part 1 has the 2 side and 2 center ones, which is a total of 4 parts, and then on Phase 2, you get the 2 cores that just continuously respawn, and you have to break them continuously to avoid getting the shield. So I have a feeling we might be getting Land Eater, Windweak Land Eater for solo raid. It feels like a strong possibility. Stormbringer, depending on the version, you have 2 breakable parts, the ones on the shoulders. Material H, depending on the version of Material H, has somewhere in the ballpark of 7. The 3 pillars in the front, technically 8 if you count the core as well, and then the hanging laser beamers on all 4s. After that, Ultra has 2 parts that respawn very frequently, if you guys remember the fight that I did on Ultra for Chapter 26 Hard. And then Crystal Chamber has the 2 pillars breakable part throughout the fight that you can do as well. So there's a lot of breakable parts in the game for boss fighting. There's a lot of breakable parts to work with on bosses. The question will be, how long is the buff that she gains and how strong is it? It's both a how strong and for how long does it last. If it's very short burst duration, might be a little bit iffy to work around with. If it's a more permanent but very low impact, it will be very iffy to work with. Now, I know that some people are saying 07 assault rifle. That's not an issue. Weapon type, I will repeat this again and again. Weapon type does not matter. It doesn't matter if it's sniper rifle, rocket launcher, assault rifle, SMG, shotgun, or whatever. What really matters is what the skills do. Because remember, for example, Scarlet is assault rifle, and she does a fuck ton of damage still to this day. Even if she doesn't get to burst, she still does a lot of damage with her autos. The question will be is how much will Sakura enhance herself through those part breaks, because there is not a lack of parts to break just in the Tyrant class alone. The question will be, for example, for things like Blacksmith, Harvester, or Gravedigger, where the parts barely respawn or just don't respawn at all. Well, if it's not permanent or near permanent, you're fucked. If it's a not very long duration, you're also kind of fucked for Nihilister because the parts are quite tanky to kill in the first place. And some other ones. So it needs to last long enough and have enough of a power increase to be relevant. I don't trust Shift Up on this, so I'm cautious on this because ever since the Clay release, I've been very cautious about what they design. But there is a good amount of places where they could be used. Now, if it's a high spike in power, but short duration, we could see usage for them in things like Union Raid for early, for some bosses. Because in Union Raid, we don't fight full fights. We fight 1 minute fights, we fight 1 minute 30 second fights at the longest. So even if it doesn't last what would have been the equivalent of the full duration of the fight in Union Raid, you could use her there because you would get that huge spike in damage if it is a spike in damage. And then just quit out before it expires, and you would have a very high uptime on it regardless because you didn't do the full fight. So that could be one of the... She could be a specialist for Wind Week Union Raid. And depending on how the entirety of the whole break parts to increase her power works, she could be good for solo raid. But so far, I'm more optimistic towards the Union Raid or Rat Race side of things rather than solo raid. We'll have to see. It will depend on how much the spike is, because it could just kind of end the duration. It reverses. So that would be Sakura mainly. Rosanna, again, it depends on how much power she will grant. The B2 slot, I've mentioned this time and time again. B2 slot is a very, very competitive slot in Nikke. When you're on the B2 slot, you're competing against things like freaking Blanc, like Naga, like Crown, like freaking, to some extent, Novel, Shotgun Comp with Leon. Like there's a lot of things that you're competing with, both specialists in very specific powerful niches or incredibly powerful Nikkes on the B2 slot. So you have to have either a niche that is relevant enough and powerful enough to make use of, or you have to be really, really, really strong to be able to make use of a new B2 Nikke that is a support. Because she will have to be quite strong if we want her to be relevant. So while it looks, it does look, Zeth, and I agree, it looks like a gimmick mechanic. Oh yeah, it's way more than Ultra, I agree, Jay-Z. Now, they could be niche or they could be quite meta. It just depends on how high of a spike and how long that power lasts for. Now, yeah, I know that some people are pretty much like, oh, Assault Rifle. It could be quite good. Because Assault Rifle, depending on how her skills work, she could just be hitting very fucking hard all the time, and she could even be off burst, depending on how relevant the burst skill versus her other skills and her attack ratio is. So she could actually be quite solid. Same for Rosanna, she could actually be solid. Rosanna, more future-proofed in some areas, but less likely to be meta compared to Sakura just because of how competitive the B2 slot is, versus a burst tree wind-coded damage dealer. This is the way you gotta see it. Rosanna is competing in the B2 slot, so at the moment, at first glance, she might have less of a chance because of how stacked the B2 slot is. Whereas Sakura, she's a wind-coded B3 damage dealer. We have fuck all for that. We have fuck all for wind damage dealers. Let me just show you. Element, wind, and B3. This is what we have at the moment for B3 damage. For B3, the wind code is being solo carried by B-Scar in terms of damage dealing. The entire wind element is being solo carried by B-Scar at the moment. Noir does fuck all for damage compared to a lot of other Nikkes. So you would have an additional option for wind element if she's good enough. If she is D tier, Epinal tier, Query tier, or even Noir tier, it's fucked. But if she's good enough, elemental advantage could push that little bit of extra mileage. The thing is, okay, let me just remove the code, and what I mean by the B2 slot is very stacked. So on the B2 slot, depending on the cooldown as well, she should, I hope to God she's 20 seconds. Because if she's 40 seconds, she might even be bordering on dead on arrival. But let's just assume that she's 20 seconds. On the B2, she's competing against Crown. She's competing against cooldown reduction Nikkes, so Dola or even specialists like, where is she? Summer Helm. She's competing against Blanc. And she's competing against the entire slot of shotgun comps, depending on how good she is versus Leona. And she's also competing against Rem for buffing things like rocket launchers and the like. Like the B2 slot, or healing, for example, Marciana, healing. You can slot a B1 cooldown reduction and slot a B2 healer. And on top of that, for Pierce Nikkes in the future, if you're building the Diesel treasure, you could have some bonuses from the Diesel that she's also competing against. And even if she's not competing against some of these, there's still Novel as well as an option. She's competing against so many Nikkes that some of them have fallen off the meta. So Novel falling off the meta should tell you how competitive the B2 slot is. Because Novel gives a massive damage amplification. Where is it? Damage taken 67%. Now, it takes a while to come online, but it's still incredibly potent. But that's not good enough anymore for most of the metas. Oh yeah, it's gonna be mostly Union Raid and Solo Raid, Zethan. But yeah, the B2 slot is ridiculously stacked. Like masked covers for Enmity Nikkes, Leg covers for instant burst, Blanc is healing and damage amp, Crown is just raw buffing with a shielding. It's such a stacked slot that is going to be very rough for Rosanna to make a dent in there if she's not incredibly strong. If her ability to increase attack through parts destruction isn't really, really strong, why would you run her over, say, Crown? Why would you run her over, say, Rem for rocket launchers? Why would you run her over, like, cooldown reduction and put a good B1 buffer? Or like, there's so many things that you could just cover instead of running her if she's just kind of, like, passable. Whereas Sakura, well, yeah, she's competing with the B3 slot in terms of damage dealing, and there is quite a few powerful in there. But there's also the elemental aspect to take into consideration. And as a result, she has at least a little bit more of a fighting chance. Now, in theory, that could have also applied to Summer Neon back in the day, but we know how Summer Neon ended up being. As a result, currently we only have Ludmilla kind of carrying the entire thing, because Emilia is not quite there. She does do quite a bit of damage on some scenarios, though, but she's not quite there yet. So she could end up being the new, like, Sakura could be the new Summer Neon. For all we know, Sakura could be the new Summer Neon. It would actually take intergalactic planets aligning and stars aligning and entire galaxies aligning to create something as bad as Summer Neon twice. But I wouldn't put it past Shift Up. Like, to create something as bad as Neon, you cannot even do it on purpose when it comes to Summer Neon. Like, even intentionally, it's hard to do it. Like, it's that level of equilibrium that just makes you question reality itself. It is possible that Sakura could be that again. They could just absolutely show us that they went against all odds and created yet another piece of garbage. But I am a little bit more optimistic when it comes to Sakura, just in the regard that she doesn't have a very competitive slot.